Hello, welcome to the bridge between Galicia and Scotland, Rosalia TV in Santiago de Compostela, today to speak about a very important publishing from Neale Hanvey, the Alapa MP for Kirkcaldy and Camden, and also the Alapa party group leader at Westminster, who is joining me today. Hello, Neale.
Hi, Pilar. Lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you too. You have published an international legal opinion on the UK Supreme Court judgment, but we're going to talk about that. But firstly, can we just say a few words about the passing of Madame McCorquodale's, Winnie Ewing?
Yeah, very,
Because
very sad.
You knew her, surely. So
I only know her by reputation, but I know members of her family and her extended family. So we haven't personally met, but her reputation precedes her. She's, an absolute champion of the independence movement. She was changing the world when I was still a little schoolboy. So, she really blazed the trail, I think is the way you put it. But she really did change the minds of so many people in Scotland and allowed them to believe that it could be possible that we could be independent.
it is a shame that she never got to see an independent Scotland in her lifetime after starting the board ruling all those years ago in 1967. Neale, you have published a legal opinion, a very interesting legal opinion, international legal opinion by Mr. McCorquodale, the Professor McCorquodale. According to him, the Supreme Court made significant mistakes in its ruling on IndyRev 2. So tell me all about that. What are the conclusions of this legal opinion, this first paper, I think, and the implications of that?
Well, first of all, there are, I think, really important two things to separate out from the UK Supreme Court's judgment. One is fundamentally about the legislative competency of the devolved legislature. And that is, does the Scottish Parliament have the power to enact or bring forward a referendum for the people of Scotland to vote on a constitutional matter? And technically, that is correct. That decision was correct. But the fundamental problem, and the problem that we have addressed within this opinion, is that they went further than that, and they made the case based quite incorrectly on the position in Quebec and the Kosovan situation, the Kosovan judgment, that Scotland had no international legal right to self-determination. And so that was really the bit that so I brought that up. First of all, a week later, I had a debate in Westminster Hall on St. Andrew's Day. I challenged that notion then. I again challenged it on the 1st of February when I moved my Scotland Self-Determination Bill in Parliament. And we have now legally challenged that finding with the help and support of Professor McCorquodale, who is not just some international legal person. He is an esteemed and widely respected legal expert on international law. He does work for the UN, and he was part of the team who won the Chagos Islands case. So he is no slouch on international law. And he's written extensively. Now, I first became aware of him when I was preparing for the St. Andrew's Day debate, and I referenced one of his articles in that debate, which addressed the right to self-determination as a consequence of the collapse of the Soviet Union. and how so many different parts, previously countries, separate parts of the previous Soviet Union, had been able to become independent countries once again. And so there's a lot of recent, in the last 25 years, recent examples in law that give us a roadmap to becoming an independent nation once again. So in terms of the actual judgment that we challenged, there's the technical bit about whether the devolved parliament has the power or not. And then there's this wider implication about whether Scotland has a right to self-determination. And his determination on that part is that, yes, Scotland absolutely does have a right to self-determination. It's enshrined in multilateral human rights legislation to which the UK is a signatory. So they have not only an obligation to Scotland to recognise that, but they have an obligation as one of the UN states to honour that obligation. So those are the two separate parts of the judgment. And in the middle of that is my Scotland Self-Determination Bill. And that kind of straddles both of those, Pilar, because what the situation that we currently have in the UK is that, so I was born in Ireland, I was born in Belfast. If I lived in Belfast, I would have the right, my human right would be recognised in a border poll, which can happen every 7 years under the Good Friday Agreement, which is enacted in the Northern Ireland Act of 1998. That is my right. That is the mechanism. There is, the only bar to that is the trigger mechanism, which is, a preponderance of support for change. In Scotland, the Smith Commission report, which was the agreement that was reached after the 2014 referendum, within that document, there is paragraph 18 states that there is nothing within this report that prevents Scotland from becoming an independent country in the future, should the people of Scotland so choose. So that is in there. What's missing is a mechanism. An explicit mechanism. Now, the mechanism that I think everybody, well, this is my supposition, but that I think that everybody would have referred to at that time was that we had established the mechanism through the Edinburgh Agreement. You win an election based on a mandate, you negotiate for a Section 30, Section 30 is granted, and you revisit the question. Now, my bill seeks to do two things. It seeks to provide a formal mechanism with equality of opportunity with Northern Ireland, so that we would have every 7 years, we'd have the opportunity with a mandate and support to revisit the constitutional question. Now, that passed unopposed at first reading, but private members' bills rarely become law, so I pushed it back to November. It doesn't have its formal second reading until November, but I will be continuing to press to have the UK government acquiesce on that point. And that would be the democratic way to recognise the right of the Scottish people to self-determination. And perhaps I'll be surprised and the UK government will do that, but something tells me that we're far too valuable for them to allow that to happen. So in broad brush, that is the state of play. That's what their judgment said, the implications which were, in my view, significant overreach from domestic law, which is their domain, the response from McCorquodale and how that challenges particularly that international element, and then the remedy that I have proposed, which sits somewhere in the middle to address both of those points. So that in short order is where we are, and we're, I'm over the moon that someone of Professor McCorquodale's standing has been so clear about the right of self-determination of the Scottish people. And not only was he clear about that right, and there are two specific points in the opinion where he makes it clear that there should be no interference in the exercising of that right, and that it is for the people of Scotland to decide, not the state. So we have two very important messages within the opinion that reinforce our position, which is that the people of Scotland, if they so demonstrate, must be given the opportunity to either have a referendum to make it conclusive and be able to do that as and when, or if that is not provided, then we begin negotiations and we fight in our elections on that position, that we begin negotiations with a majority an election.
Neale, when the Scottish government decided to go to the Supreme Court, do you think it was a mistake then to go in the first place, according to all these?
Yes, I do. I think it was a mistake because it was the wrong question in the wrong court, being argued by the wrong person. So it was the wrong question at the wrong time. The time to ask that question is after, and this is reflected in Professor McCorquodale's opinion, after you've brought forward legislation and been stopped. But because the legislation wasn't brought forward, you're asking a hypothetical question, and they said, no, you can't do that. So you're then boxed in. You can't move once that question's been answered in the way that it was. So the timing was wrong. The question was wrong because it was quite obvious that was sailing close to the wind to ask a question on independence based on the devolved settlement. And the other reason that the question was wrong is, and this is a really important point, the Scottish Parliament, although it's called the Scottish Parliament and they're called the Scottish Government, that entity is part of the British state. It is an entity of the UK. It's not a genuine Scottish Parliament. It's an administrative body of the UK state, which is badged Scotland, no more, no less. And whilst the laws that it does enact are Scottish fundamentally, and they become part of Scots law, the actual entity itself, that institution, is not part of Scotland's institutions. It's a separate thing, and so what the UK state in effect was asking, if the Scottish government is part of the UK state was asking the Supreme Court of the UK state against the UK state if it could dismantle the UK state. And of course the answer is going to be no. You know, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. It's not tricky. So it was the wrong question, and therefore in the wrong court at the wrong time. And it's reasonably well understood that the Lord Advocate is not the biggest fan of Scotland's independence. So if you send somebody, if you appoint someone to fight your legal case, it's probably a better thing to do to appoint a lawyer who actually believes you, who believes in what you're trying to do. When you appoint someone who is lukewarm at best to the very argument that they're being asked to pursue, then that's not a particularly encouraging position to find yourself in. And I think, many people have commented on the quality and substance of the presentation, and it was underwhelming, to be polite.
Mm-hmm. And from the Alapa Party, you're insisting on the idea of the Scotland United Front. You have obviously another a different strategy from the SNP.
Yes.
Many voices are calling for a national Scottish convention, and
Yes.
there are going to be elections coming up in not too distant future. So what are the plans from the Alapa Party? Will you be standing again? Do you think the SNP will get on board with the idea of this Scotland United Front? Because I think it's a key issue there.
Yes.
Because if you want to fight for independence, you have to be united, no?
Yes. Yes, indeed. Unfortunately, there are a number of people at the top of the SNP who have chosen to unite around other issues, issues that do not command a great deal of support within the Scottish public. And not only that, they are having a pretty horrid time in government with one calamity after another. And so our proposal is that instead of fighting an election based on that record and other parties fighting the election in competition, from a disadvantage, isn't it better, given that that support for independence is now over 50%, that all independent supporting parties campaign with one united message that a victory in that election of greater than 50% of the vote would be sufficient to begin negotiations with Westminster for independence. Now, the route beyond that is not set necessarily. There are a range of things that Professor McCorquodale sets out in his opinion that are viable options, and we're delighted that dovetails very nicely with some of the things that we've been pursuing in the Alapa Party for the last 2 years, specifically an independence convention where all political parties and Civic Scotland come together to decide how best to approach the issue. That was instrumental in delivering devolution at the end of the 1990s. And it was a very empowering process for the country. So we see that as, a much more credible option just in practical terms. However, that position is now reinforced by the findings in McCorquodale's opinion, where he really makes it clear that the lack of wisdom in the decision to take that question to the Supreme Court, because that has effectively rendered the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish government toothless in respect to fighting the corner of independence, because their parameters have been so clearly now defined with the reserved matter to Westminster. So the way that needs to be advanced is that you step outside of that Parliament. Through the Independence Convention, you would organise a representative body of the Scottish people, and it would be that body that would take the argument for self-determination forward to Westminster, because then that is the people of Scotland rather than representatives of a UK body. And so it's been useful in that it has clarified who can take that case forward, but it does two particular things. It limits the idea that the SNP are still persisting with, that a single party elected to the Scottish government is in any way going to be treated as a credible force to take forward the case for independence. They've boxed themselves in. That is not how it's going to work now. And because the body that needs to represent the people can't just be a single political party, that means that they can't be that sole vehicle even in the civic domain. So they've kind of shot themselves in the foot for that single party ticket notion. So it's now clearer than ever, not just for practical purposes and common sense, but actually in terms of legal representation and strengthening the case for international court, should it come to that, there needs to be a Scotland United, a move to a very clear Scotland United ticket in all elections. Now, we're not saying it's just this upcoming election. Our view is that this will be at every election until we're able to make a breakthrough.
And can you see at the next Holyrood elections, the SNP 1, Alba 2 working in the future?
Well, I think that really comes down, you see, I think what people generally don't understand is that, so my relationship with the majority of SNP people in my local communities is every bit as good as it has always been. In fact, with some people, it's better because, there are some people who were a bit annoyed with me for leaving the SNP who now look at Westminster and say, well, at least Neale's trying to do something. And they get very frustrated with the lack of action from my former colleagues. So there are some members who are very supportive, a lot of members who left the SNP at the same time. But there is by no means all of the SNP parliamentarians, but there's a very solid core of SNP parliamentarians who won't even meet my gaze, won't look at me or speak to me at all. And I just can't understand that. That maybe works in the playground at school, but it's not the way to conduct yourself in politics of such importance as your national constitutional future. So I think there's going to have to be some change, and unfortunately that change may be delivered by a continued slump in the polls for the SNP, and maybe they need to realise that unless they do something like Scotland United, then we will all lose. We will all lose, because if they get beaten as a single party fighting on domestic issues, of which are not their strong suit any longer, then that could set the cause back substantially. And I just don't think that's a risk worth taking.
Neale, I'm amazed about the toxicity of some debates in Scotland. I've been following the debates and the Quality Act debate. What's the situation with that issue at the moment? Are we starting to see a bit of common sense coming through, or
in the equalities debates?
Yeah, in the Quality Act debate. Yeah.
Not really. There is, well, again, there are, you have to separate these things out. In terms of the discussion within the wider public, and so public opinion is firmly against an unregulated adoption of self-ID for trans people. The Scottish Government insists that this is something that they want to continue to pursue, although the Section 35 notice has been served, and I don't see any real appetite in the public for that to be pursued. And it certainly is a bit of a lost cause, because there is so much resistance to this law, this kind of legislation, following two very public cases. So we had a double rapist called Adam Bryson, who changed his identity to Isla Bryson, and we had another chap called Andrew, I think it's Miller. I might be wrong there, though. So just I want another chap who abducted a child, and so the public are not having this at all. There was we had a really good debate a couple of weeks ago in Westminster about refining the language. I made a very important point that this, having clear language in the inequalities legislation for every protected characteristic is essential, because without being able to describe everyone, you can't protect anyone. And so I think that argument is certainly beginning to win the day. And this is not at all, as they like to call it, transphobic. This is just about basic safeguards and ensuring that, you know, nefarious people who want to behave badly, don't hide behind trans identities and undermine those rights, because that would be the worst thing in the world. But the Scottish government still believe, I think, on this issue, that a slogan is a policy argument, and it's not. It's a slogan, and there is still resistance to the intellectual arguments around the importance of clarity in law and the importance to protect the rights of everyone. But I think we're making progress. I just don't think we're making progress with the Scottish government. They are very resistant to any change in their thinking.
Neale, on Saturday, all under one banner is going to have another amazing march for independence. Are you going to be there?
I am definitely going to be there, and I found out yesterday I'm going to be speaking. So I don't know when I'm speaking, but I'll be speaking, and I'll be speaking about the McCorquodale opinion and Scotland United. Those will be my two main themes, because we do need to move forward. And one of the really important things that the McCorquodale opinion does that I think is so fantastic is it gives the independence movement permission to take charge of the cause. They don't have to wait for anyone. We just have to get organised and get on with it.
Well, I'll be following, as usual, the march by Independence Life, those weird rascals who are working so hard.
Yes.
They do an amazing job. Neale Hanvey, thank you very much for your time. It was a pleasure listening to all these amazing possible solutions for independence for the people of Scotland. Thank you very much, Neale.
Thank you, Pilar. Nice to talk to you.